it certainly appears that languaging the pointers when they're coming out of the natural state itself seem to have some impact.
Yeah, I think my take on pointers is the simpler and more direct they are, without diverting from the essential message, the greater the chance that they can make that impact, particularly if we're interested and we've been looking into these things and we're deeply interested and curious about who we are and about what's being pointed to. Then a few well-placed pointers can really do the trick, can be quite helpful. And again, especially if they're not mixed in with all kinds of inessential secondary topics. And that's what I've always tried to do in sharing about this, in writing about this, in talking about this. And the reason why is that is what was done with me. That's what Sailor Bob did with me, and I think which was so valuable. So I figured I might as well return the favor by continuing that, to never stray too far from the basic essential message, which is what you're seeking, and what is being pointed to is in fact what you already are. So I always come back to that over and over again. And sometimes if there's somebody that's open to that, is interested in it, that may be enough to point out what needs to be seen.
Yeah. So when I first heard that from you, you shared it very much the same way that Bob shared it with you. It was remarkable in that I had never heard it put that way, that you are what you seek is something that lots of people have said over the years, but the seeker is the one who's in search of himself and all those kind of ways of putting it. But to point out what that actually is, that had never really been done. So maybe we could, and you covered that very well in the earlier podcast, but I don't think a review of that would hurt a bit. That to know that the truth of what you are in very clear and simple terms, that what I am is this awareness of being, or being awareness.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're often doing as a seeker, when we view ourselves as a seeker, is we're engaged in all kinds of activities and considerations and thoughts and stuff that are really not much to do with the essential message. We're pursuing experiences, we're going to different events, we're studying different things. We're hoping something will happen, and we often don't know what that is. There's just a vague sense of, gee, I hope something happens to me so that I can, be in some state that I envision or imagine to be the freedom or to be whatever the understanding is. And we invest a lot of energy in those kinds of things that turn out to be not particularly meaningful in terms of the essence. And so there's two things going on with these pointers when we're first coming into this is we need to hear that those things that we think is what the essence of the spirituality is not what it's about. And that's going to free up a lot of our energy, a lot of our awareness, a lot of our consideration to then really hunker down on the core message of non-duality. And that's the universal message that the reality that the sages and traditions are speaking of is in fact what you actually are. And this is the one takeaway. This is the essential message that cannot be forgotten, cannot be cast aside. And the thing that often happens is that once we begin seeking and looking for experiences and going to others and studying about it conceptually and all of these things, all of those things are indicative that we have turned away from the core message. And it may take a little bit of looking to understand why that is so, but it's very vital that we realize that the essence of the non-dual message is that you already are that now. Your being as it stands is in fact that ultimate reality which you are seeking. And if we miss that, as far as I'm concerned, we miss everything. And the result of that will be that the seeking and the suffering and all of those things will go on because we'll be missing the essential message. We will not be understanding the truth of who we are. So that's why these pointers must always be going back, just staying very, very close to that and always hammering home that your being, your true nature as it is that. And that's really all we're saying in all these different ways. We're pointing to that over and over and over again so that we don't miss that fact. And then what that means is we come back to now, we come back to our immediate experience to just have a look and just make sure that it's clear what our being actually is, which is, the question you were bringing up. And so we're kind of clearing the brush away so that we're not dealing with all these extraneous issues. And then once we're doing that, then we're just coming back to right here and now to just take a straight look in and see for ourselves what is the nature of this being or this true nature that we already are. And I think, as I have covered before, but these pointers will always be very kind of repetitive in the sense that we're always going over and over the same basic fundamental points. But one of the key ones is that clearly what you are is already present. There is no doubt about that. And that means that what non-duality is about and what all the sages and scriptures are describing is already attained. It is already present, simply because you have no fact about your very presence or existence itself. And what we're going to see is that is it. That is what this is. And it's been with us right from the beginning. It's always been with us. There has never been a break or a moment in which we have been outside of our own existence itself. So that's the good news. And that's why this becomes very, very simple if we can just hear and appreciate this message. It suddenly occurs to us that everything this is about is already present. And that's a wonderful revelation, just a marvelous insight. And that's what allows this recognition to strike home. And there is the good news is there is nobody that is missing this recognition. There is nobody that can say that they are not. And it means everybody comes within this, kind of domain of being, having this availability, to see this and to see who they are. Everybody qualifies for that. Everybody is right there immediately at the same level, in the terms of being able to pause right now and see all of this and all of its totality for themselves. Because there's nobody that's distant from that or outside of that or lacking that or missing that or somehow lacking in some kind of inherent qualification. So it's a great leveling kind of message. There's no hierarchy and distinctions. There's no time and separation. It's immediately in hearing this message and resonating with that, it puts you right there immediately with this possibility of looking and verifying this for yourself. So, and this is very, very often missed and rarely communicated in spirituality, in spiritual circles, that this is not a process, it's not an attainment, other people do not have it. All of these things that we labor under, and even some of the modern ones that we hear, like people talk about a final understanding or a shift or an energetic shift or the penny dropping or getting enlightened. Even all that stuff's a bunch of concepts. Even that has nothing to do with this. It's a wonderful thing when you start to realize that there is no shift and there is no special moment and there is no final understanding, and all of these things are still conceptual, and they're still thoughts and ideas and notions that we've taken on board in the mind. And why is that so? It's because the being is already here. It's already attained. Nobody needs a shift or an awakening or a future time for this to be. It's like it's already there. Now, we may have overlooked that or not appreciated that, and that's what the pointers are for. It's, hey, hear this message, stop, take a look, and notice that what you're seeking is already here. So we start right with that point of essentially acknowledging this doubtless fact of my existence being present, and simply looking at that, noticing what is that? Because whatever it is and all of its qualities are actually already fully attained, and they always have been. And that's the beauty of this. And it really could not be any other way, because if this reality was somehow separate, or somehow distant, or somehow an attainment, then we would be separate from that. It would be an achievement, something that would occur, and it would be in time, and it would be conditioned. And it would be something that we would, even if we did attain it, it would be something that we would lose. And so this has to be, this ultra simple, ultra non-dual nature of what's being pointed to is really the only solution. And that's what they've been telling us all along by saying, you are that, or your own mind is the Buddha, or however they might have said that. And the thing that you start to notice is the message has been universal, absolutely consistent, and virtually identical in every culture, every time period, every particular spiritual approach. When you take away the verbiage and the different cultural trappings and all that, you find virtually the identical pointer. Which is good news, because, if people have been looking at this from all these different perspectives and different time frames, and they've all discovered the same essential reality, that's a pretty good indication that this is a very solid and very clear truth. And so all we're doing is we're just looking to see and verify this in our experience, and that's what the pointers are encouraging us to do.
Yeah, the undeniable experience is of the beingness. There's no escaping being. And so it's simply coming back to realize that's what we are.
Yeah, and now that we know that's who we are, because that's the only constant, let's just, let's look at it and see it as it is. And there's absolutely no attainment involved. We're just examining something that is doubtlessly present. And it's a kind of an interesting thing when you realize that, this is already here. I don't even have to achieve this. I don't even have to awaken to this or anything like that. I'm actually looking at something that I already see, that I already know. And even though, and of course we'll see that this being or sense of existence, it has been with us, has always been present. As long as we have any cognizance, any notion of our own presence, obviously that existence must have been there. But we may have been overlooking that, and that's what ignorance is. I mean, that's the root of the problem in spiritual. These teachings tell us is that the root is not that the existence or the reality isn't present. The issue is that it is present, but we've been overlooking it and ignoring it. And so ignorance means ignoring something. So what we're doing here in talking about this is we're stopping ignoring this. We're starting to not ignore this, and in not ignoring it, what that means is we're going to be looking exactly and precisely at this true nature that we are, simply to see what it is, not to attain it, not to find it, not to achieve it, not all that stuff. But every one of us must start from now with that acknowledgement that clearly that is present. It cannot be any other way. And so we're just simply going to say, oh, since this is what I am and this is what's being pointed to, I might as well have a good look. And that's what, when we talk about seeing who you are or looking or recognizing your true nature, that's all that really means. It means just stop and notice what is the nature of what you are. And it's incredibly simple. It's incredibly easy. Even though we may have overlooked it and missed it in the sense of not noticing that. But the truth of it is that when you hear about this, and it's stated very, very clearly and directly with no duality in it, it's about the easiest thing that you can do, because it's the inescapable constant that you can never be outside of that. So it's like falling off a log, as they say that phrase. It's very, very easy. It's a quote that Ramana Maharshi said one time comes to mind. He says, this knowledge of the self is as easy as looking at a piece of fruit in the palm of your hand. Or he said it's actually easier than that. So, because this, he says, if you're looking at something like that, you've got to have a hand and a piece of fruit and your eyes and all the perception and all that. He says, looking at your being, noticing that is actually easier than that, because you don't even need any of that stuff. You don't need any eyes or any hand or any thoughts or anything like that to know that you are. So he actually said in this poem, self-knowledge is the easiest thing there is. And that baffled me for many years until I met Sailor Bob, right? And so he had this pointed out from his teacher in person and directly, and he was able to convey that by that simple statement of, do you know that you are? That simple question, which everybody knows, of course. And he just confirmed that by saying, well, that's what this is. And a little sentence like that, one statement and an immediate intuitive answer, that was just a few seconds of a dialogue. I mean, literally 30 seconds. And then realizing, well, that's what I've been looking at. That's what I've been searching for and reading about all these years. That's what this is. And now I know that. That's the thing that I didn't realize at the time. And then everything just falls into place, because now you know where you're looking. And then you see what I saw, and what any of us can see is this being has all these qualities to what it is, like that it's present and conscious and unchanging, and it's not a thought, and I already am that, and it's effortless, and I can't get out of that. All these things, they just come pouring out of this immediately as we begin to notice and see this for ourselves. Yeah. And then we realize what all the scriptures and all these traditions have been saying. But the difference is that we're seeing it now as direct experience. And I hope that's what people can do in hearing about this as we talk about this, realize that they follow the pointer, but then they realize that now they are seeing for themselves as direct, immediate experience. I know that I am. I know that I'm present. I know that what I am has this conscious nature. I know that the thoughts are coming and going, and yet I know that I remain. See, and it's kind of like, the funny thing is, all these things become self-evident. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're trying to do with the pointers, and that's the value of them. And they just get us up and running so that we can see these things. And then you're beyond the pointers. I mean, you're beyond the need for all of those things. Yeah. There's no more need for some elegant spiritual concept to try to capture the essence of words. Exactly. And the spiritual concepts and pointers are designed to fall away naturally after they're used. The highest teachings, the highest, clearest pointers are just to get us to see in our direct experience, and then they've done their job. So they're going to fall away, We don't have to cling to them or try to, overuse them or constantly be going back to the pointers. That was just somebody's attempt to point out what we are. Once we've seen that, if we keep going back to the pointers and stuff like that, that's actually overcomplicating it. And sometimes we do that. Somebody would say, well, I know that I am. Okay, and then let me get back to all these kind of concepts and pointers and activities and stuff like that. But if we hear this clearly and we understand what's being pointed to, then we won't have to burden ourselves with that kind of thing. We'll follow the pointer, see it for ourselves, and then forget the pointer. And, the teacher and the scripture, the pointer that was used is not to be, revered as some kind of ultimate reality or something, in and of itself. And, in seeing this and knowing that your being, and that's the pointer that I'm using, but your being is what this is. There is nobody else out there, no matter what they know or how high or realized or whatever that they appear to be, that has this or possesses this or somehow has some kind of inside experience that is better, let's say, than what you have, because it's your very existence itself. And the highest and clearest teachers out there, all that they can do is simply point to that fact, and hopefully as clearly and simply and directly as possible, and then getting themselves out of the game and getting the spirituality out of the game, getting the pointers out of the game, and leaving you naked, alone, clear, and standing in that direct realization. And they know that you don't need them. And the best teachers that I met and ever talked to, people that know this, that was always very, very clear. And that's not often always clear in the spiritual marketplace. So we want to, get this pointed out and then stand on our own 2 feet with that direct recognition.
Kind of standing on no platform, standing on no thing, right?
That's right. Because you are that no thing. Your natural state is that no thing. And, it's, here you are that. And those texts, those classical texts always end on that revelation, thou art that. And there is no teaching beyond that.
I remember that you and I talked once about some place or other where the conversation was on the ancient phrase Sat Chidananda, being consciousness, peace, whatever, however you translate it, and that you had found somewhere where maybe it was Adi Shankar or Ramana or someone said, that isn't it either. Mm-hmm. Even Sat Chidananda is not it either.
Exactly.
It's not really an it that is something like a thing.
Yeah, Sailor Bob says it very clearly, and it's very helpful, easy to grasp, and that is the idea is the word is not the thing. So that means the description and the word, the concept, whatever it might be, is only a pointer, is not actually what the thing is in and of itself. So our true nature, in its most essential reality, is not a word. And, we use these words like being and consciousness or the peace, all of these things, emptiness, no thing, changeless, eternal, whatever it might be, the natural state. And, those are just pointers to guide us to follow along and notice that which is here right now, which is even prior to the description. And we're going to see that, that the word consciousness or being or whatever it might be, that word is actually not what you are. And so that's when the pointers themselves kind of self-destruct and they fall away. And you realize all of those pointers were just somebody's attempt to try to point this out, to guide us toward recognizing our own presence, our own existence. But we're not to cling on to these pointers, like saying, what I am is Satchidananda, or what I am is emptiness, or what I am is no thing. Because that is the second you conceive of that, it becomes a concept that's just an appearance in the mind. And so what's actually happening in spirituality, as far as I can see, is they're giving us a temporary concept that is clearer and more unified and more true, relatively kind of more solid, that helps us to kind of get rid of some of these other ideas that we've had about who we are. And then, but as we get to that and look at that, right in that final kind of looking, we'll see that that concept does not describe who we are either. And in my experience, all of the teachings and all the traditions, they will always negate that last concept. Yeah. And that's why in Buddhism, for example, they say everything is emptiness. And just about when you're ready to say, oh, the absolute reality is emptiness, then they tell us that the emptiness itself is empty, or just negating itself. And that's why if you look deeply into these other traditions like the Satchidananda, or the being or the consciousness itself, gets negated as well.
Yeah, empty doesn't mean empty, like the opposite of full.
Yeah, because empty is clearly one side of a conceptual duality. Emptiness, fullness, emptiness, form, being, non-being, conscious, unconscious. So clearly these are just dualistic concepts. And we don't want to be left clinging on to some new spiritual concept. And I feel that is largely what happens in spirituality is people end up with a new expanded concept of their identity. But they still are identifying as, some mega concept. And then, you say, well, what I am is emptiness. But that's actually not what you are. It's just a way of pointing. So what I would say is, come back, let that concept, let that core pointer guide you. But then in direct experience, pause even that concept. So say you're thinking, I am Satchidananda, that thought. Okay, just let that thought pause. And without grasping onto the concept, just get a taste of what is actually present here without the concept. And that's what they're talking about. That's how I would look at it. It's a very distinct, very clear and kind of a vivid recognition of something. And that's where you get that taste, you get that feel, you get that sense of who you are, of what your natural state is. And you're probably going to come out of that maybe trying to say something about it, but now you know that anything that you say is actually still a concept. But the difference is now you know it. Now you know it's a concept.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, I think it's an important point that the concept of a thing is not the thing conceived, that the word is not the actual, however you want to say it. Because what I've noticed about the way, I spent 30 years of seeking and searching in all the various traditions where this was not clearly pointed out, and that what I noticed is there was never any discrimination or any distinction made between the concept of the thing and the actual experience of the thing. So the experience of emptiness and the concept emptiness are in completely different worlds.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't notice that. And so this starting out from the clarity of this natural being, and looking directly from that into it, kind of looking direct. Just wait a minute. I'm not a concept. I'm no concept.
Exactly. That's what I was going to point out also there is that this, if you ask anybody, are you a concept? They know immediately, intuitively, they know, of course, I'm not just some word or idea. And just really appreciate that, because, what is it that you are, when you say and for certain that you are not a concept, there is something clearly recognized there that is beyond any doubt. And I would say, just say to really get into that, really feel that out and explore and appreciate that which you are recognizing when you say, I know that I'm not a concept, that which you recognize there and know for certain, that's what this is, nothing more. It's nothing other than that. And everybody will recognize that immediately when it is pointed out. That's the beauty of this, Ask anybody that at whatever level of understanding or experience they may have, ask them that simple question. Do they know that they are? And it's interesting how clear and solid and certain that is for everyone. So then that's the clue right there. That's the immediacy. The immediacy of this is then just to simply ponder or reflect on, what is it that I'm recognizing? Because what I am recognizing is what is being pointed to. And, how far are you away from that right now? Do you need to go somewhere? Do you need to practice anything? Do you need to have an experience? Absolutely not. And everybody would know that. Ask that question to anybody. Do you need to practice to be present? Do you need to go somewhere to be what you are? And everybody will, answer that they don't need that. And isn't that amazing that you can ask anybody, at any level of understanding these basic questions, and they will all answer identically and with confidence from their own direct experience. It's really a stunning thing, actually.
When we devolve experience to concept, then we want to answer the question with an answer that we then take on board as some identity. Whereas what you're pointing out is that in direct, actual experience, there can't be any concept that can be what I am or what you are.
Yeah, and that's so that they say, or we've read that, they talk about reality as being non-conceptual. And that's just a way of trying to, it strips away the conceptualizing process to reveal this immediacy of this natural state of our being right now. Now, that is the purpose of spirituality. That's, if you look at Buddhism or Hinduism, Vedanta, whatever, when you really look at it, all it is, it's a pulling away of every concept to show you what you are. It's like, it's like taking off all the clothes and all of the ornaments and all of the costumes, and then taking that mirror and just putting it in front of you so you can see, what you are without the concept. And also the beauty of this is we don't have to get rid of the concepts or get rid of the mind or anything like that. It's just that there was a little bit of confusion in mixing up our essential identity as a concept. So we're looking at that and clarifying that. But we still have the body mind and the concepts and all the functioning is going on, and there's nothing wrong with that. There never was anything wrong with that. It's just that we're no longer confusing our identity as some mere concept.
We're no longer confusing the menu and the meal.
Yeah. And that was the only source of suffering. Because our natural state, and we'll see this as we look at our being, as we see it even now, that this being has no confusion. It has no doubt. It has no seeking. It has no suffering. That's why they've always just tried to describe it as peace and bliss and unity and all this stuff. I mean, so what we find is all of those attributes is already what you are. You know, and the only reason that we missed that is we took ourselves to be some limited concept. And that's all that we're doing. We're not getting rid of the concept, but we're just through this simple understanding, we're recognizing our true position in relation to that concept. So I'm no longer saying that this idea is what I am. And that's all. Because without that, there can't be a problem. And it's as simple as that. And, you know, you've got, you know, that freedom from suffering, and freedom from doubt, and freedom from seeking, and freedom from the personal problems. Why? Because all of that only comes in by identifying our natural state as some limited concept. And as we talked about, the central concept is that concept of the I. And what we see as we kind of recognize this way of looking is it becomes very, very clear that even that concept of I itself is not what I am.
Exactly.
And because that's the root concept, and because that's what all the limiting ideas attach onto, that's why we only need to see that. We don't need to see and analyze and you know, kind of mess with all of these other leaves and branches. We just if we look straight at that root idea. So if you're not a separate I, if you're not that separate person, then what are you? Well, you are that unconditioned being, that pure non-conceptual awareness itself.
Yeah. I'm really, really glad you talked about not throwing out the concepts, though, because I think a lot of, quote, seekers tend to think, well, once they get this experience or this direct seeing, being, knowing of the non-conceptual beingness itself, then they want to negate concepts. Well, I think the simplest way I've ever heard it put is that you can't even get out of the room you're in without this whole world of concepts, because there's no such thing as outside except as a concept. So we don't throw away concepts, do we? We just recognize that we are not any concept at all, and that the I concept is that the I, which is non-existent as a thing, it seems to me that this I is something like a superstition, or something like a belief that the earth is flat. Or you and I once talked about pre-Copernicus, the belief that the sun rotates around the earth. But we didn't recognize that as a belief, that we thought that's something we knew. And I think in the same way, my own experience is that I didn't believe that I was a separate I. I knew myself as a separate I. I really knew myself as that until, you know, then I started looking at it in this way and saying, well, wait a minute. Maybe what I know isn't necessarily real.
Mm-hmm.
What if what I know, like the earth is flat, is not necessarily real? What if the I is not necessarily who I am, even though I know myself to be the I thought? And that made a big difference for me in looking at this, is to challenge that I directly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this kind of teaching or pointing, or, you know, this whole recognition comes alive, I think, for us when somewhere along the line the question has started to arise about, wait a minute, who am I? What is my real identity? Because, you know, until that stage there, we, like you say, we know who we are. You know, I know that I'm that person. I know that I'm John Wheeler. I know that whatever these attributes are, I just have that gut level feeling that this is my identity. And I'm not even really questioning or examining that at all. I'm functioning in my experience, you know, through the filter of that concept. But somewhere along the way, for whatever reason, you know, it may get challenged a little bit, or we may begin to wonder about who who am I actually? And then these kinds of pointers will start to be tremendously interesting and very, very valuable, because what we'll actually find is that our problems in life they're all going to tie back down into this assumption of being this concept of the separate I or the separate person. And as we begin to look at that and shine that light of curiosity and attention to investigate that, the whole thing starts dissolving like a house of cards. It rapidly begins tumbling down, because it's completely fallacious and is not cannot be substantiated on direct evidence. Like here we are sitting here, present and aware as what we are, and then periodically this notion of what I am is coming and going as an idea in the mind. And the funny thing is, we've been somehow equating our abiding identity as that periodic thought that's just simply popping in and out of consciousness. And that's the funny thing. Like, if we pause and look at that, we suddenly realize, well, how could that possibly be what I am? Because I was here before, during, and after that concept. If that was what I am, then I would be coming and going, and that's not intuitively our experience. And it's amazing how quickly this whole thing dissolves, and that belief comes, and that confidence that we thought we knew who we are, it just rapidly dissolves the moment that we're interested to look at that. And even though it's funny, because we may have, in the appearance of things, gone on for decades and decades, absolutely convinced that I know who I am, and yet a few moments of direct looking completely unwinds the whole identity, and never to return, really, because once I see something as not true, it's very hard to go back to somehow having an unquestioned belief in that.
Yeah, once the convicted of being a con man, you don't believe him or her anymore.
Yeah, and people, must appreciate this, and I certainly did not, up until a certain stage of looking at this, is that all the seeking, all suffering, all the questions, all the problems, everything like that in life that can be any kind of limitation, it's all riding upon the identity as that I thought. Because it's that I thought that has all of those problems. That the natural being that you are has none of those problems. And it's a stunning, it's a life altering, absolutely kind of earth shaking insight, because it's the way that freedom or the liberation, so to speak, of stepping beyond that limitation. It's the way that this is actually possible, because you realize it's all hinging upon a kind of a series of assumptions, and that linchpin, that core one of taking myself to be that separate identity, that's the root of it, and that's, that I thought is the owner of problems, because, the being here is not seeking anything. It doesn't have any problems. It's not separate from anything. It's not questioning anything. It has no limitation. It's absolutely full, absolutely unconditioned. And it's a stunning thing, and I really encourage people to really stop and think about this and notice this, that it's the I thought that is having all the problems, not you. And so that's why if I only have those problems to the extent that I believe or identify as that thought, and, without that belief, just that questioning that right there frees me from owning all of these issues. And even things like death and the afterlife and reincarnation and whatever people come up with, even all that stuff is only for the I thought. These issues do not trouble the natural state. I mean, your being isn't sitting around saying, well, what happens to me, in the next life? That's a concept arising in the mind in relation to the I thought. And so you even step out of all those metaphysical issues.
It would be no different than asking, well, what happens to me in the next minute?
Yeah.
Where's this me for whom there's a future?
Exactly. And, if you look straight at the being, like we're, encouraging to do here, and we'll realize, well, that being, there's no change in that, from now, between now and the next minute. So, who is that one who is concerned about the next minute? That's the image of what I am, or of that sense of I, that image, that conceptual image in the mind. And so the idea really is, well, what's going to happen to that in the next minute? And then when you realize, well, that's just an empty image that's constantly coming and going with no substance anyhow, who cares? It doesn't matter what, it's just popping in and out of consciousness anyway, as it's always done. It's not even a living thing. It doesn't have a birth or a death or a future or a rebirth or whatever it might be. I mean, it doesn't even really apply. I mean, how can a concept have a birth? I mean, how can a concept die? I mean, it's coming and going like that, but who cares? Because it's not, it's not alive. It's not a real thing. So the amazing thing that I saw, which was stunning and unexpected really, was that, examining this notion of I and then realizing its conceptual nature and seeing very clearly that that's not what I am, all of these problems were completely annihilated. All the spiritual intricacies, all the personal problems, all the past, all the future, everything. And, it's hard to really appreciate that, or I certainly, when it started to be pointed out to me at one stage that this was the possibility here, and if you really think about it, it's really an incredible opportunity, because what it means is that, all personal problems and all spiritual problems and all these things, they are all resolved by simply understanding what you are, and if that separate I concept is in fact your identity. And you don't even have to try to resolve all those things. They automatically resolve themselves by simply seeing the very clear fact, that concept is not what I am. And so, I mean, I'm a big believer in, the path of least resistance. If we're going to put in a little bit of effort or a little bit of understanding, let's put it right at the core of that so we get the most of a payoff. So to see that you've never been a separate self and that you, in fact, are that unconditioned reality, as far as I'm concerned, is like the biggest payoff you could get.
Yeah.
So why not? Let's go ahead and put a little bit of investigation on that. It's not difficult at all. It's actually quite simple. And that's what we're talking about. And that's why, people say, well, there's nothing to get and it's all the same and it doesn't matter whether you suffer. And I mean, these things are so off the mark. I mean, they're so incredibly out of accord with what this really is about.
Yeah.
Because, why would Buddha speak for 45 years? Why would Nisargadatta talk? Why would Sailor Bob talk? Why would all these people share this message if there was no value to it, if there was no meaning to this?
Right.
So there's an incredible meaning, there's an incredible experience that is available with this stuff.
Direct, and the beauty in what you share is the simplicity of it. That keeping it really, really basic and simple, without adding all sorts of dogma, without adding all sorts of conceptual verbiage that, trying to describe, et cetera, but just to stay with these basic points. It's so obvious when it's pointed out in this direct fashion.
Yeah, that was my experience too. The funny thing is these points, they're self-evident, really. I mean, they're inescapable, and they don't even need to be figured out or understood or puzzled over. I mean, they're just really, look at this fact and see it, and the moment you look at it, if it's, again, if it's on target and it doesn't have all these complexities to it, you can't help but notice these things. I mean, you can't even, even if you don't want to see them, I mean, if it's that simple and you just have a little bit of willingness to look at it, you still can't miss it, which is quite interesting. So, and I do find that basically that, in my experience, that in spite of all of my spiritual background and all that I actually it had never been presented with the simplicity, with that clarity to it. It was always mixed in. It was kind of a mixed bag of, a couple of good pointers and then a lot of other crap that I found in the end was completely useless. And so why not stick with the basics, stick with what's simple and clear, which cannot be really doubted and is very self-evident. And I think that's what we want to do in terms of if we're sharing this with our friends, if we're talking about this, if we're writing about it, if we're trying to, pass along whatever understanding that we've seen with this stuff, is that we, to always strive to keep it direct and simple. And you notice I've never talked in any of this about a future time. I've never talked about an awakening or an enlightenment. I've never talked about a process. I've never talked about levels. I've never talked about teachers who have it, and all of these things, which are just they're how would you say, they're the kind of standard fare, like the thing that drives the professional spiritual marketplace is all of these kinds of concepts, and we're not using those.
Exactly.
And I hope that people might appreciate that, because oftentimes people make an assumption that what they're hearing in terms of the common typical spiritual presentation, I've heard it many, many times. Oh, that's just the same thing as this. Oh, they're saying the exact same thing as this.
Not at all.
And and that's just because we often don't appreciate there's a very distinctive perspective coming through this, and I think that as we look at this and stick with the basics of it, that we'll start to appreciate directness and the immediacy, and because it's that directness and that immediacy and that clarity behind it that if we follow in that spirit, then this stuff is right here, right now, very, very immediate, not as an attainment, but as a fact of direct experience for anybody who would just take a little bit of time to just simply look at it for themselves. So we're not going to be talking about, 10 years from now you're going to get something, or you're going to get, we don't even speak we don't even speak in that language. We don't even talk about you had an awakening and now you're going to do this and all. That's just all imaginary, concepts that are very, very heavily coming from the false I position.
Well, they're all coming from what I call survival. That the survival of the entity that takes itself to be real, and often doesn't seem to want to be found out. But the staggering simplicity of this is that there is nothing to find out. There's nothing really to comprehend here. That there's just
except a clear recognition of that fact.
Well, I was just going to say that one fact.
Yeah.
One simple fact.
Yeah, and the fact is, like I said, I've tried to distill it down, and it's that, there is this reality, and you are that. And we don't want to move away from that.
Exactly.
Not you will be that, or other people have it, or do this, and then all these conditions. No conditions. This reality is what you are. And we're going to just hold to that I call it, holding the line and just not deviating from that. And the mind at first, when we first hear this, it may want to jump to the concept. Yeah, but what about this? But so-and-so says there are levels and something has to happen. So the mind, what it's doing is it will be moving away from the central point a little bit. That's the habit of it. So we're going to say, no, let's come back and look at the basic reality. So somebody says, well, yeah, but this takes time. Okay, let's look right now. How much time does it take to be what you already are? And that just blows that concept out. Oh, okay. And yeah, but isn't there a final experience that happens to me and something like that? Okay. So this being that you are now, is it an experience that happens? Okay, well, no. Okay, so that blows that one out of the water. Somebody says, I need to awaken. And they say, okay, well, let's look at our being right now. Are you awake? Are you aware right now? Yes or no? Oh, my being is awake. I am that awareness okay, so that blows that concept out of the water. And that's how you can look and, dismantle any of these, when the mind wants to jump out to a concept. Just, okay, let's take a look and see if that concept is true in the light of our experience. And what you always find is every concept is false. And you've never contradicted thou art that, if you want to say it that way.
Sure.
And you do that a little bit, and, you kind of start to realize, it dawns on you, wait a minute, all these concepts are false, and I already am that. And then even that, that's kind of, it settles down with that. And then even that concept that I am that, you don't even need that to be what you are. So that one falls away. That's like what we were talking about. Even that last kind of spiritual concept that guides us to see the truth of what we are. You realize with or without that concept, I still am what I am. And that's the point that, you don't need any spirituality, any point or any concept. You need nothing. Because there is no concept that can enhance your natural state. And that's the end of the game. That's the end of the whole thing, And that's now.
Checkmate.
Checkmate. And we're not talking about, yeah, but what do I do 10 years from now and how do I live this? All that's all been annihilated. That's just all, everyone listening, I think now, if they followed along, will, even spot that even right now, is that all of those concepts are only for the self-center. They can't possibly be for your natural being. So we're not even going to be interested in those concepts. We're not going to be, yeah, but how do I live the teaching? Well, that just doesn't make any sense. Yeah, who and why? And you're the reality. So who cares? Oh, that's just one of those learn concepts about the separate self. And so, none of those things even stick or apply to you, or they have no relevance to what we're talking about. And say, well, yeah, but don't I need to get enlightened? Yeah, but isn't that just a thought? And aren't you here? Isn't your natural being, shining here in all of its immediacy, even with or without that learned concept?
Yeah, even the notion that there's a body here, that can't be without thought.
That's true.
There's a body without a thought. And am I a thought? No. Then am I the body? No. Well, what am I then? Just this presence.
Just this non-conceptual, doubtless presence of awareness that can't be negated. And, everything really is a concept. Everything that we perceive, the moment we label it as a chair or a body or a object, whatever it might be, we're already conceptualizing. So what is all this? What is everything without the concept? Because clearly all these things that we're perceiving, they're not the concept. The word chair is not the chair. So without the concepts and labels, what is it that's present? Not only for myself, which is already a concept, but for these seemingly other things, which is already another concept. But what is it that is present here prior to the conceptualizing, and there's not even a separation yet? Because the moment that I say myself and others, I'm already labeling. And so when we take off all the labels, there's not even any duality here. There's not even any objective experience. There's not even a subject. There's not any separation. So
no subject, no object.
Yeah, and it's not anything, and there's no thing, and all that is here is what we've been talking about all along, which is that no thing, doubtless, non-conceptual reality or of being or awareness, whatever we're talking about. That's all that's here right now. There's nothing other than this. There's nothing to even speak of except that. So, that's the...
Not even any out there.
Yeah, because there's nothing out there unless you have the concept out there.
Yeah.
And there's nobody here. There's nothing over here without the concept that there's somebody over here. So there's a very nice quote that Sailor Bob used and liked a lot, and I'm sure because it's very, very clearly expressing this, is that, and I think that we can see this now, but where it says, all there is this self-shining, ever-fresh, non-conceptual presence awareness. Just this and nothing else. There has never been anything other than this. And that's how they said it in Buddhism. But that's how they, in the Advaita Vedanta, they say, this reality is one without a second. Meaning there's not even a second to even speak of. It's just this. And so it folds back into the same understanding of all there is this one non-dual, undivided, doubtless reality shining beyond any doubt. And call it whatever you will, being, this luminous, non-dual consciousness, this unconditioned, timeless, whatever, we're just using all these words, but that's what you are. That's all that there is, and that's all that has ever been. Everything else has never come into actual existence.
And knowing that the concept is not what's being pointed to by the concept, I think is crucial here.
Yeah, exactly. So all we're doing is we're just kind of stripping away all the conceptualizing to see what's present, to see what's real, to see what is actually here. And that's what we try to do over and over and over again in different ways, coming at this in kind of different perspectives. But I think hopefully this talk, this interview and our going back and forth may be helpful, to the others who may be looking or resonating with some of these ideas. So just to really, so that they can see for themselves. That's the only point of talking about it, really.
Exactly. And there's a sense here of, well, for want of a better word, just a deep sense of a real authentic compassion. Not a pity, but a real authentic compassion. Like I love one of the old definitions of compassion being the ruthless destroyer of ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
But ruthless is really the wrong word for it. I think there's a love behind this compassion that hopefully people will get the taste of here.
Sounds good.
So simple. Direct and immediate. John, thank you for your love, your compassion, your expression, and for who you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. It's nice to talk with you again.